Hi, Dr. P here to talk about the virtues of action points in game designs. With the usual caveat that these slides are very wordy for people with impaired hearing, and sometimes I say near exactly what's on the slide, sometimes I go far afield, and I expect most people will listen to this rather than watch it. What are action points? Well, they're a way to limit a player's actions. They're another way to put a player on the horns of a dilemma, quote unquote, which is what classical games are all about. Put the player on the horns of a dilemma because he has to decide which thing to do because he can't do all of them. Typical dilemmas derive from tight constraints, and in this case, the constraint is the number of action points available. You as a player have a limited number of action points, which won't let you do everything you want, usually, but you can do more than one thing. Now that's as opposed to the old style war games where you could move everything, and to older games which you can think of as having one action point, the one thing you can do each turn in chess, checkers, Go, and many card games. In a typical action point game, you have several action points, so that lets you do more than one thing, although the action point cost of what you do varies from cheap to dear. For example, moving a vehicle might cost more than moving a human, or acquiring or building a new vehicle costs more than moving an existing one, or building a new building costs more than building a new vehicle. You, the player, have to decide what you need to do most. On the other hand, you're not prevented from choosing any particular action. Now that contrasts with card-driven games, especially card-driven war games, where you can only do what the cards in your hand allow. So to summarize that, you can do more than one thing, but less than everything, and you're not prohibited from doing any particular thing. It's a matter of choice. Now, a virtue of this is that no matter how many units you have or how many assets, if you can only do something with a few of them or only a few groups, you can exert the full force of all your units against opponents. On the other hand, when you're small, the limited number of actions is much less, limiting. And when you're very small, you can use every resource or unit you have. So, in effect, the action points are a form of catch-up mechanism, or at least something that prevents runaway leaders. For example, in my prototype Germania, which is about Germanic tribes surviving in the ruins of the Roman Empire, each player has 6 action points available in his turn. The action points are required to create new units, settlers, to move units, even to play event cards. The event cards have an action point cost. 6 points is tolerable when your nation is small, but becomes quite limiting when you're large. Even if you have twice the military force of another nation, say 10 units versus 5, although that 10 units is an awful lot, you can move at most 3 pieces, 2 action points per piece. If you move 3, though, you can't get new pieces, you can't play event cards, which have a strong influence in the game. If 2 smaller nations have a go at a larger one, they have twice the freedom of action in effect, even if their forces in total don't match the forces of the larger nation. Now, as an aside, in some other games I'm working on, action points available can be increased by capture of resource locations. Think oil in World War II and the difficulties the Germans and Japanese had as they encountered oil shortages. So you have this additional flexibility. And of course, obviously, you can give more action points to one nation than another in asymmetric situations. Now, committed intent is a form of action points. You may not be familiar with the term, though you may have seen it in action. Each player has an identical set of action cards. Each player secretly chooses one to use each turn. Each card allows a limited set of actions. I use this method because it also avoids first turn advantage, because the action cards have initiative numbers and are executed in initiative order. Typically, in this kind of game, there will be more than one card for each particular action or set of actions. One might have a much better initiative than another. There's another virtue here, because typically when players have fewer choices, they take their turns quicker, and the game is less overwhelming. In fact, a hallmark of mass market games is relatively few choices. Now, whether action points achieve this speed up, I'm not sure, because you can think a lot about how to use your few action points. But it's certainly quicker than you can move all your pieces. Another possible drawback of action points is that some players don't like constraints. And if you're designing a game more as a playground than as a opposed game, a competition, then having too many constraints in the game might be a drawback. To me, action points are a modern way to get away from you can do everything every turn. I think action points improve play. Thanks for listening.